All right, well, welcome to our IRB Basics Training 101. My name is Bailey Wary. I'm in the Office of Research Integrity. I'm the IRB coordinator. And this session will give you a general overview of what the IRB does and what the process is to get an application for human subjects research through the IRB to approval. And as you're listening, feel free to write down any questions that come up, and I'll try to answer them at the end of the session. And if there are any of these topics that we go over that you feel like you could use a larger training session on, just let me know. We are always trying to improve our training opportunities, and at the end I'll let you know of another upcoming one that is slightly different than this one that you may be interested in. Okay, so what is the Institutional Review Board? It is a committee that exists to protect human participants or human subjects who are involved in research. Currently, the UTC IRB committee is composed of 18 professors and community professionals representing a broad range of professional disciplines, backgrounds, ethnicities, and genders. This committee is responsible for reviewing and approving all research activities associated with UTC that involve human subjects. It is important to realize that the IRB is not unique to UTC. Any federally sponsored research has to be reviewed by an IRB committee, and they exist in all institutions that oversee those kinds of research. So the intent is to protect human subjects. Okay, so when we say that the IRB monitors research to ensure that human participants are being protected, what are they looking for? In short, the IRB is looking to make sure that physical, emotional, financial, and social risks to the human subjects are minimized. The potential benefit of the research is greater than the potential risks to the participants. Participants are selected in a fair and equitable manner. Participants are fully informed of the possible risks and benefits of participating in the research and document their consent. Participants can be assured that their privacy, confidentiality, and safety will be protected, and that safeguards are in place to protect vulnerable subjects. So how do you know if you're doing research? If you're conducting research that involves human participants, you will need to have your application or your project approved by the IRB prior to beginning research work. The federal government has very specific definitions of the terms research and human participants, so you will need to decide whether or not your project will require an IRB review. So research is defined as a systematic investigation including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So let's break that down a little bit more. Systematic investigation includes a hypothesis, is methodologically driven, data analysis, and drawn conclusions. Generalizable knowledge means that conclusions or data will contribute to the established body of knowledge through dissemination, such as through an academic publication or conference. The results are expected to be generalized to a larger population, and the results may be replicated. Okay. Human participants are defined as living individuals about whom an investigator, whether professional or student, conducting research, obtains information or biospecimens through intervention or interaction with the individual, and uses, studies, or analyzes the information or biospecimens, or obtains, uses, studies, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. So what this all means is that participants must be alive, the researcher must obtain data from them through interaction, or the data analyzed must be identifiable. So if there's a data set that is not identifiable at all, that is not a human subject. Okay. So does your project meet the definition of research with human participants? Some of the following activities are examples that may be research: interviews, surveys, analysis of identifiable existing data, experimental interventions or interactions, case studies with more than 3 individuals, and medical chart reviews. Okay. Sometimes students are confused as to whether or not their project that is being completed for class needs to be approved by the IRB. So to determine that answer, you need to ask, Do the results have the potential to be published or presented outside of the classroom? And this can include research dialogues. So if any students are wanting to present for research dialogues and it is human subjects research, then that would be a yes. Is the activity defined as a research project with a research question or a hypothesis? So if the answer is yes to both of these questions, the student should submit an application to the IRB. Okay, so does anybody in here have a class that maybe you're doing research methods or anything with? You do? Okay. So if you have a class that's doing research methods and the students are not going to present outside of that class, that would fall under class-related activities that would not need IRB review. So we're going to talk about that just a touch here. But for these situations, the instructors are responsible for the protection of human subjects. So faculty instructors must have completed IRB training and have filed a classroom exemption application with the IRB. The classroom exemption application is called Form C. Faculty will need to complete city training and submit a copy of their syllabus, research project assignment and description, and class roster. And once approved, the faculty will essentially be acting as the IRB. So students would complete an IRB application and submit it to their faculty, and instead of submitting that all the way to the IRB, the faculty will review it, make sure that subjects are protected, and then go ahead and let them do the research. Note that no project that involves more than minimal risk to the participants may be dealt with under this procedure, and students who are considering presenting at research dialogues will need to have their project individually reviewed by the IRB prior to beginning their research. If you are affiliated with UTC in any capacity and you plan to conduct research with human subjects, you need to get your project approved by the IRB before you begin your research. So after considering all of that information, you've decided that your project does require IRB approval. What should you do next? There are 5 steps to securing IRB approval, and they are listed here. So you'll first complete the required training, determine the level of review for your project, complete the application, submit the application electronically, and then monitor your email for follow-up communication and submit timely revisions. So we'll break those down for you. Okay. UTC IRB policy requires that all people listed as investigators on an IRB application must complete the online IRB training course provided by the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative, or CITI. So if you hear us say CITI training, this is what we're referring to. You can find information on this training as well as instructions for first-time users on our website. Investigators must complete the basic course best suited to their discipline, either biomedical research investigators or social and behavioral research investigators. The IRB webpage has detailed instructions and tutorials on how to access and complete this training requirement, and training must be completed before IRB approval will be granted. So to show you where this is on our website, just on our home page under Institutional Review Board, which is at utc.edu/IRB, you'll see over on the right, we have a button for required IRB training. And that will take you to this page. This page has all of the information down in the middle of the page, as well as quick links. So you can link directly to going into CITI right here. And then we have tutorials for logging in to CITI. So either if you're a new user or an existing user, this will help you get the correct training course that you need. So after you do your training and you're ready to submit your application, you need to determine the appropriate level of review for your project. So there are 3 levels of review. Really, for our purposes, we only talk about the first 2, exempt and expedited, and all that means is the level of risk of your project and what kind of review it's going to need. So the lower level of risk, the lower the level of review. The higher the level of risk, the higher the level of review. So we're going to talk about determining if your project is exempt. If it is exempt, you go one route, and if it's not exempt, it is expedited, and you go a different route. Full board applies in some cases only if there's more than minimal risk, and that is determined by the IRB at the time of your application. You don't have to determine if your project requires a full board review. Okay, so when we talk about exempt research, we're talking about research that falls under a certain exempt category. And there are 6 exemption categories that we will talk about today that might apply to your project. Those are listed here. These are defined by the federal government, so we follow what they have lined up or laid out for us. So category number 1 is educational research using normal educational practices. 2 is educational tests, surveys, interviews, and public observation. That is going to be what a lot of research on our campus is. Category 3 is non-medical benign behavioral interventions. Category 4 is secondary research on existing data. Category 5 is projects supported by a federal agency and designed to study public benefit or service programs. And category 6 is taste and food quality evaluation. Okay, so that was a lot, but we have a lot of resources on our website to help you determine this. So, and I'm going to look at them with you in a minute. But under our left navigation column over on our website, you'll see a category, apply for approval. And this gives you your steps, how to determine the level of review, how to complete a form, and other information. Over on the right, we have our exemption resources. So this is what you're going to use to determine the level of review for your project, because that determines the type of application you submit. Okay, so this is the list of exemption categories, but with a lot more information, so that will help you determine what you're doing. So I said a lot of our applications fall into category number 2. These are surveys, tests, interviews, public observations, if one of these criteria are met. So the criteria have to do with anonymity and confidentiality. If you're dealing with anonymous surveys, that's category 2I. So it says recorded information cannot readily identify the subject. 2II, any disclosure of responses outside of the research would not reasonably place subject at risk. Criminal, civil liability, financial, employability, educational advancement, reputation, or information is recorded with identifiers. Sorry. And IRB conducts a limited review. The limited review is over privacy and confidentiality only. So basically these are saying you can collect identifiers if the answers to their questions aren't going to affect their reputation or put them at risk for criminal charges or other risky items. Or you can do anonymous surveys, but if it is slightly risky and you do have identifiers, the IRB is going to review it for privacy and confidentiality protections. So we just want to make sure that if anything is could affect the participant, that the IRB reviews it. That's just one of the exemption categories, exemption category number 2. So I'm not going to go into detail in all of these exemption categories. You can look at this chart yourself and knowing your research project, be able to apply the different categories. Category number 3 is a new one since January. It's benign behavioral interventions. So it could be giving participants something to watch and then asking for their feedback. You might be recording the responses with data entry or audio-visual recording, and then it has similar conditions that have to be met in order for it to be exempt. So what this means is that if you're doing something that is low risk enough, then it falls into these categories, it would be exempt. If it's similar to one of these but has a higher risk or doesn't match any of these conditions, then it would be an expedited application. Another way you can look at this, we have multiple resources, like I said, is an exemption decision chart. It's the same information as that category definition sheet, but it's kind of more guided look at your research. So you can start at the beginning and answer questions about your research that will lead you to what category for exemption that your project may be and may fall under. So if you answer these questions, it will send you to specific categories. So if you answer these questions and end up here, it says go to category 1, and you just scroll down until you are under category 1. Does exemption 1 apply? And if it's not research conducted in normal educational settings, it's not category 1, but it could be exempt under 2, 3, 5, or 6. And you can just continue with the process until you figure it out. Okay. All right, after you've figured out the level of review that your project requires, step number 3 is to complete the appropriate application. So you've determined that your research project falls into the exemption categories, then you're going to go ahead and download a form. For the exempt category, you're going to download Form D. For the expedited, you're going to download a Form A. Expedited just means anything not exempt. Just make sure that's clear. Okay. Again, these resources are in the same website, apply for approval, and up here at the top are our application forms. Form A for an expedited application and Form D for an exempt application. There's a note here to remind you guys that when you're getting a form, go ahead and download it from the website. Don't try to fill it in. If it opens in a browser, make sure you're downloading it. It doesn't work very well if you try to do it in your browser. And then we all are often updating our forms. So make sure you are always going back to download a new form every time you're submitting one. Okay, when you're completing your application, keep in mind these general tips. You're going to want to be succinct, be clear and comprehensive, but the IRB does not want to read your entire research paper either. Provide only the details relevant to the research component involving human participants. Do not use discipline-specific language. Your application will likely be reviewed by a committee member who is not in your department or field of study, so it must be clear to a reasonable non-scientific person. Define all terms, acronyms, names, or methodologies. Once defined, acronyms or abbreviations may be used. Make sure that you have completed all sections and answered all questions. If a particular section does not apply, just use NA so that we know you know it doesn't apply. Attach all your research instruments, informed consent documents, and condition letters. The exempt designation form, Form D, will be a shorter form than the full application, Form A, but both forms will ask you to describe your project in detail, and the questions asked fall into these categories. So you'll answer questions about privacy and confidentiality, the subject population, your methods and procedures, your background and rationale for the study, the risks and benefits, the informed consent process, the purpose and objectives of your research, or any incentives that you may be offering. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes here talking about informed consent. Voluntary participation and informed consent is at the very core of what the IRB is set up to protect. Information must be presented to enable people to voluntarily decide whether or not to participate as research participants. Informed consent is a process, not just a form. Some of the core principles of informed consent are: informed consent must be obtained before the research begins. Information must be understandable. Subjects must have time to consider whether they want to participate. Consent must be given without coercion or undue influence, and subjects must not be made to give up legal rights. Most expedited research requires a signed consent form. Anonymous surveys only require a cover letter or introductory remarks that cover all of the elements of informed consent. If you're doing an anonymous survey, it actually causes a concern for breach of confidentiality if you are taking in signed consent forms, because then you have their names linked to the data. Okay. Federal regulations define the elements of informed consent that must be provided to participants. The standard elements of informed consent are an introduction stating the study involves research. You want to identify the principal investigators, give the purpose and background, the participation time and duration, the procedures, any risks or discomforts, benefits, incentives, confidentiality, contact information, voluntary nature of the research, and what will be done with information if participation is discontinued, approval by the UTC IRB, any exclusions, and the space for signature, or in the case of an online survey, maybe a click here for consenting. Okay, we have informed consent resources on our website under the informed consent page. Notice that over on the right-hand side, we have some links to templates. We have signed consent templates as well as unsigned consent documentation. We've made a specific one for online anonymous surveys. It's really easy to follow if that's what you're doing. And these are good to use to make sure you have all of the required elements of consent. Okay, so you have your form filled out and you have your consent documents made, you've completed your city training. So the fourth step is to submit your application. If you have students submitting an application under you, make sure that you are as the faculty advisor, are submitting it for the student. Otherwise, you just email it directly to instrb@utc.edu. Okay, so the last step is to monitor your email for follow-up communication and submit timely revisions if needed. Once it comes to instrb@utc.edu, that is the IRB email address. I'm the main monitor of that email address, but other people in our office can also monitor it if I'm out on vacation or something. And so this is the process that it follows after it comes into our inbox. So the Office of Research Integrity receives the application via email. ORI conducts a pre-review and may request changes. The application is checked for clarity and completeness. If your project is exempt, then ORI will issue an exemption determination letter via email. If it needs to go through the expedited process, the application is forwarded to 2 IRB committee members for review. Committee members may request additional changes. Revised applications are then re-reviewed by the committee members and approved, and then ORI sends out the approval letter. A full board review process would require the full board to convene and meet, so this can take up to a month because we have to actually make a meeting and have the full board come and review the application. Okay, so how long will it take to have my project approved? So the length of time for review depends on a number of factors: the category of review required, the completeness and clarity of your application, the volume of applications that have come into the IRB at the same time, and the timeliness of your responses. So allow plenty of time for this process. Start early. Average review times: exempt are going between 3 to 10 business days. Expedited can take between 7 and 21 business days. Full board review could take up to a month. Okay, so on our forms site under the IRB, we also have checklists. These are the checklists that the reviewers use to look at your application and make sure that it's complete and is ready to go. So if you follow the checklists first, that might save you some time in the review process as well, because you will have already checked your application, make sure it's complete. Okay. Once your research project is underway, you may decide that you need to make some changes. These may include adding or removing an investigator, changing the project methods, adding a research site, altering your recruitment approach, or extending your project's end date, or terminating your project early. You will need to notify the IRB of these changes prior to implementing them. To do that, you'll complete and submit a Form B application for changes, annual review, or project termination completion. You may be asked for follow-up questions at this point. Wait for official approval before implementing your changes. If you have an existing project that was approved prior to July 19, 2018, then you will be required to complete this same form annually as long as your project is active and at the conclusion of your project. Projects that have been approved post-July 19, 2018 don't have an annual review process anymore. So that is one of the changes that has come about recently. Okay. Our website is full of all kinds of helpful information. You can find our IRB policy, all of our forms and checklists, instructions for completing and submitting the application, and city training tools and tutorials to learn how to get into city training. So please check out our website. And then we have contact information. This is Amy Doolittle is our IRB chair. Her contact information is here. You can find all of these on our website as well. Lindsay Pardue is the director. Alexa McClellan is our assistant director. She's right over here too. And I'm Bailey, the IRB coordinator. Feel free to contact us.